Welcome to the Geopolitical Show, The Chessboard, where we dissect geopolitics by asking the right questions. I'm your host, Farhan, Intisher, Khaled. The core intent and purpose of this show is to bring you unadulterated information on geopolitics through asking the right questions, through systematic analyses, and of course, expert-validated discussions. The intent of the show is also to portray to you the reality of geopolitics and assist you in asking the right questions yourselves through comprehending the discussions that we bring to you. The topic of discussion for today is the current reality of the US-Iran peace process and the changing nature of strategic position of the US in the Gulf and the changing of the security dynamics in that region. I hope that you'll remain with us. This is a very critical discussion, but before we head on to said discussion, let us watch a brief video on this topic.
Well, in the last hour, the US military has said it's launched another wave of attacks on Iran.
The United States military has now reimposed its naval blockade of ships traveling to and from Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz.
The fresh round of strikes from the United States.
Moments ago, CENTCOM revealing U.S. forces are hitting Iran with another round of strikes.
Dozens of young girls were killed in airstrikes that hit an elementary.
We're seeing the Middle East absorb a wave of Iranian retaliation.
There is now a second front that has opened up in Lebanon.
Explosions rock multiple cities.
The Pentagon saying U.S. airstrikes have destroyed hundreds of Iran's ballistic missiles, launchers, and drones.
If we didn't do what we're doing right now, you would have had a nuclear war, and they would have taken out many countries, because you know what? They're sick people.
If we didn't knock the hell out of them, they would have had a nuclear weapon within 2 to 4 weeks.
They would use it within, the only question is, within 1 hour if they get it, or 1 day.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
An earth-shattering moment for the Middle East.
Israel has confirmed that the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been killed.
Iran's formerly supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead.
Military skirmish. Senators, though, Admiral, are now debating if this has reached forever war status. Can you give me your sense of where are we?
If not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months.
They have the wherewithal, the stored up, preserved knowledge to make a bomb very quickly. If they wanted to do it.
Iran is so dangerous. Weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs.
They're very close. They're 6 months away from being about 90% of having the enriched uranium for an atom bomb.
Iran is gearing up to produce 25 bombs, atomic bombs a year, 250 bombs in a decade.
Ladies and gentlemen, time is running out.
Iran will be capable of producing alone, without importing anything, nuclear bombs within 3 to 5 years.
Who is your worst enemy, Mr. President?
دشمن اصلی ایران کیست؟
America.
America.
Viewers, thank you so much for being with us. Today I have with me a prolific speaker, Ambassador Iftekhar Ahmed Chowdhury. He is the former foreign advisor to the Caretaker Government between 2007 to 2009. Sir, it is a pleasure having you over at the show each and every single time. You not only enlighten the audience, but in the process, you end up enlightening me as well. Sir, before initiating the conversation on the Middle East, I would like to address a broader topic. This is something I ask you each and every single time you come to the show. How has the global order shifted since the last time I spoke with you? What do you think of the global order and its evolution?
Yes, the very fact that, thank you very much for having me, by the way, to start with, that you asked me this question, I'd probably give you a different answer every time, slightly different answer. Also, it is reflective of the content of my broad response to you. Yes, the global order is changing. As in physics, it's a fundamental law of physics that everything is in a state of flux. The world is in a state of flux, and you never step into the same river twice. So likewise, the global order, as you call it, is constantly in the process of undergoing change. But as the classicalists used to say you need to define your terms before you engage in a conversation. So global, of course, means the world into perception, and order is the kind of club rules that guide it. Yes, the global system, the state system, is just a number of states interacting with one another. That is a system.
Of course.
Now, the states are not, they are usually anarchic in the sense that there is no central big boss guiding everything. And yet, they follow a certain common club rules as they relate to one another. And that is the order. That is the order. So this has indeed been, it is constantly changing, as I said. What is important is when the more noticeable changes occur. We've heard of something called paradigm shift, Robert Kuhn's concept of paradigm shift, that sometimes you have a series of events which demonstrate that the old premises on which you based your conclusions change, the premises change, and the change is sharp. So those are the paradigm shifts. One paradigm shift, of course, has been that unipolar world that we have known during the Cold War period, which was more or less led by the United States, has given way to a more or less a bipolar, it seems to have given way to a bipolar order. But has it? That's the question. People sometimes speak of chimerica, see, the G2 kind of thing, you see, which has different perceptions even in Beijing as in Washington. In Western analysts, from a sort of a control perspective, think that G2 means there are two powers controlling. The Chinese have a subtle different way of looking at it. They call it the new two-power relationships. So you see, but the world is not just divided into two polars. It is multipolar. It used to be said, I think, Francis, King of France, said, "Show me the edict of God, which divides the world between Spain and Portugal." Those days. So we don't have an edict of God dividing the world between China and America now. So there's a multipolar system emerging, gradually emerging. These are probably led by regional hegemons in different regions. As I said earlier, the system is a set of states operating, as we do so in a sort of an anarchic world, but it isn't chaos. It isn't chaos because there are rules.
Of course.
Now, it has been said that this anarchical society, it's Hedley Bull, the sort of Professor Hedley Bull, who was the sort of, in many ways, the founder of what they call the Anglo-Saxon School of International Relations, would argue that the states function by several dictums. One is, of course, sovereignty, that you're allowed to rule yourselves and take care of your own territory. Secondly is diplomacy, that you talk to other states as well, and if you have any differences, resolve them. Third is international law. There is no such thing as international law as exists in criminal procedure code or civil procedure code. International law is acceptable club rules. Acceptable club rules, yes, like sir. Charter of the United Nations, etc. So those are, by those, it's meant international law.
Normative values associated with such clubs.
That is true, absolutely. And finally, there is the great powers. States do interact oftentimes as equals, but some are more equal than others, and take upon themselves certain extra responsibilities. And this is the G2 thing that we started our conversation.
If I may interject, sir, you said something about them taking on responsibilities, extra responsibilities. Yeah. But my question would be, were those responsibilities assigned to them, or did other powers come to the table and said, we would like for you to take this certain responsibility for the betterment of the global community?
Yeah, these responsibilities evolve. You see, for example, control of the global goods, the rights of passengers, climate change, law of the sea, etc.
Of course.
I mean, these which require sometimes a bigger capability, bigger capacity and capability. Capacity is the ability, the wherewithal to do something, and the capability is the technical know-how. So some states, these are the big powers who emerge, and that was as we defined it the first time round. So big powers appear on the scene and take control of certain events and situations.
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. A very prolific answer. Now, we were referring to the global community. So one of the global, I would say, I don't want to refer to any conflict as a war, because I would say that the intention behind the conflicts and the association of certain definitions might come off as being misconstrued to certain communities. However, we cannot deny but say that whatever happening is in the Middle East is short of being a war. This is something by definition, and of course by reality, it is a conflict between two quite prominent countries in the world. So what do you think is happening in the Middle East between the US and Iran? Of course, there's the association of Israel, but we will get to that later. But what do you think is happening between these two countries, and what is the current state or condition of the peace process between the two?
Okay, do you want me to go directly to the peace process, or do you want to...
Anyhow you like, sir. The floor is open, and you decide the trajectory.
Okay, all right. I mean, it's a well-known fact that there has been, as of the 28th of February, we have seen, it mightn't be defined by everyone as a war.
Yes.
Because yesterday, I think in Ankara, we heard President Trump call it a military action.
Military action, of course.
Military action. But anyway, kinetic action is also involved. So there is some fighting going on. There's a sort of shooting war as well. At this point in time, we are on almost a sort of a crossroads. The MOU that was signed second week of April, that's one could say in tatters at this point in time.
It is.
In fact, yesterday we've heard President Trump say that it
is over.
It's over.
Verbatim, of course.
Yes, but then again, this conflict will continue long after the war is over. You see, unfortunately, because just because sometimes if there is a problem does not necessarily mean there is a solution, or at least readily solution. But there is certainly what is often needed is the capacity to control the problem, to manage the problem, to keep it controlled in a way that states can continue to function as members of the international community.
Of course.
So what happened was we had this MOU, which came into being through the initiative of some other mediators, Pakistan in particular, Qatar as well. And then, you see, everything was not sharply defined in this 14-point MOU, as you realize. And it was probably kept that way in order to reach to have the MOU signed at first, and then sort of, kick the ball somewhat up the can up the road, so that you can address those issues later. So that was done.
Yes.
It had some benefits. We saw the the ships
passing through the Strait of Hormuz.
Through the Strait of Hormuz, which was initially closed by the Iranians. Then, just as we thought, perhaps there was differences with regard to the interpretations.
Of course,
it was a good thing that through the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei, nothing really happened. Nothing seriously really happened, except for a great outpouring of emotions that we perceived of 1 million people, which probably provided some kind of a power to the Iranian system,
of course,
Iranian government. The authorities. So I don't know if that is a product of that, but they were quite hesitant. They were more reluctant to give in to anything. And the problem arose around the interpretation of probably the 5th article of the MOU, which was the passage through the Strait of Hormuz, that every ship needed to obtain some kind of a coordination or clearance from the Iranians. It wasn't the case on the last but one day of the funeral, and the ships were fired upon. Then on the following day, 3 more ships were fired upon. The Americans reacted, and then the Iranians retaliated. And after these kinetic actions, President Trump said that the MOU is over, and yet he said he didn't absolutely negate it. He did observe that if the negotiators are interested, they might continue, both on the American side and the Iranian side, if they wanted. My suspicion and feeling is that the mediators who were involved will now pick up on that thread, the slight thread that keeps the MOU hanging, and try to act on it.
So this is a question I had. Are we back to square one to where the initiation of the peace process began? The reason I'm asking is because since we've heard President Donald Trump speak on it, and he did say that he had no intention of carrying out a peace process where the other side was reluctant to cooperate with him. This is not verbatim, but this is the essence of what he said. However, we are seeing a completely different message from the Iranian side. So I would like for you to elaborate on from your own understanding and perspective as to why the MOU did not function as it was supposed to be, because we did see that Lebanon was brought as an element to the MOU, that stopping the war on all fronts. Of course, the Iranians were able to keep their missile programs. The nuclear program was in a way set up for later discussions, of course. So one would say that the negotiations for the MOU was almost for the benefit of Iran, rather than it being for the benefit of the US. However, given the recent skirmishes and conflict, we are seeing that it is, as you've said, in tatters. Why do you think it did not persist? The MOU did not persist. And again, as I said, are we back to square one of negotiations?
Well, you see, not quite in that sense. We have a signed document. That is some achievement under the circumstances. However, remember that a principal actor in this situation, Israel, is not a party to it.
It is not.
Is not a party to it, but is relevant right from get-go, right from para one of the document. You see, which says that Lebanon is included in the negotiations. And in Lebanon, of course, as you know, as we all know, that the problem is that since the state of Lebanon is the shell of the state of Lebanon is very weak, and it's not functioning. It's not a functional state in many ways. Hezbollah has appeared as a principal actor. And the conflict is between Hezbollah and Israel.
Of course.
And Israel has moved up north, up to the Litani River, which is way into Lebanese territory,
yes, of course,
and is holding it for now, subject to strikes from the Hezbollah. The idea was if the ideal would have been if one could have got a ceasefire, but which is difficult under the circumstances, is the nature of subconventional fighting. Neither side can agree to a ceasefire because the Israelis believe that they need to occupy their territory, and the Hezbollah believes that in order to keep the Israelis disinterested in occupation is to strike them, keep on striking at them in a way as to make it the situation unbearable for them. You see, so that is the subconventional warfighting strategy. These sort of go against the spirit of the MOU.
Yes, sir.
We knew that these problems were there. The whole idea, I think, was to get people to talk, to Giorgio, as Churchill would have said, rather than war, so that at some point in time, everything is agreed upon together.
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. And I would like for you to reflect on the mediation process itself and the parts that the actors who were associated with said mediation. For instance, Pakistan and of course Qatar, who have played pivotal roles in bringing the two parties to the table through both direct and indirect talks, so that we would be able to reach, if not a peace agreement, any form of written agreement, as you've said, hence the memorandum of understanding. So in short, and in simple terms, how do you think the mediators played a part, or how successful were they in playing their part as part of this peace process, such as, of course, Pakistan and Qatar in question?
Okay, we will take the two states that you mentioned, Pakistan and Qatar. Pakistan has an old practice of diplomatic mediation, which they, in a way, appear to be perfecting.
Of course.
You know that it was Pakistan which played the conduit between the United States and China at one point in time. Pakistan is very close to China.
It is.
So everything that Pakistan does is obviously not at the behest of China, naturally, but well coordinated with China. That's a very important fact. The other thing is the individual actors in Pakistan, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Field Marshal Asim Munir, Mohsin Naqvi, the Interior Minister, Ishaq Dar, the Foreign Minister, all are very key players in this. Ishaq Dar maintains that very close relationship with Wang Yi in China, on the other hand. As we all know that Field Marshal Asim Munir is President Trump's favorite Field Marshal, as he says.
Yes.
Shehbaz Sharif has tremendous political experience. Anyway, they brought all this to the fore and managed to keep talking to Pakistan and to United States and Iran. Not Israel, because Pakistan, of course, does not recognize Israel, but that is not necessary because for this at least, because Pakistan is dealing with the United States. On the other side, we also have Qatar, which is a Gulf actor. Qatar is a host to one of the major American bases which have come under attack.
Of course,
Al Udeid near Doha. Qatar also has had an important role to play in the Gulf as a mediator. This is something they have developed for some time, almost imperceptibly. During the time of Sheikh Tamim, the current emir's father's time, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa bin Al Thani, who had a very bright foreign minister turned prime minister, Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jabbar Al Thani. Late 90s and early 2000, they were playing a mediating role between the GCC and Iran.
Yes, of course.
See, Qatar was close to Iran. Qatar was also developing some contacts with Israel.
Yes.
Oftentimes they were seen as the enfant terrible of the GCC, a little actor which is punching above its clout. But nonetheless, it played a positive role. So they have now brought this to the fore. They are connected to all the parties in the conflict, and they also have very close links with Pakistan. So Pakistan and Qatar acting together, Pakistan eventually, the possibility is that as the roles evolve, Pakistan will take on the military and the security aspects and the financial aspects of the deal. As you know, the MOU has considerable financial components. Qatar would be involved with that side. Now, that is a logical explanation, but I would assume that's how it will go, provided, of course, everything is not blown up now.
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. And if I were to ask you in quite briefly, if I were to ask you, do you think that the mediators played a very successful role in bringing the two parties to the table? And given the reality on the field right now, where the fighting between the two countries have continued, quite unfortunately, do you think that they would be able to, as President Trump has shown interest in being brought to the table once again, do you think these mediators will be able to bring the two parties to a point where they will negotiate further and bring the peace process to a better understanding?
Well, we don't know, of course. I mean, no one knows how it will conclude, but all conflicts end with diplomacy. That is a truism in international relations. The struggle is on. The endeavor to that end is on. As we said, that MOU has been signed. This will, of course, become more effective when there is an international Security Council resolution or something like that to make it sort of more effective and almost mandatory. We have not reached that state, but we are going the inch by inch. But it doesn't mean that. If the key issues are resolved, if the lower hanging fruits are resolved initially, there's a chance that we can reach a point whereby there will be some kind of an understanding between the principal protagonists in this conflict.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I want to ask you about the Strait of Hormuz. We are seeing conflicts surrounding this narrow body of water once again. And as part of the MOU, if I'm correct, Iran suggested that they have some sort of dominion, if I were to use that word, over that body of water. And outside of that written agreement, there was a notion which was shared that they would impose strict fees on the passing ships and vessels. However, that goes against the ethos and principles enshrined in the Convention on the Laws of the Seas, because open and free bodies of water, one country cannot impose its own fees just because the other vessels from other countries are using it as transit. However, there is a loophole, and you'd be able to impose a service charge of some sort. For instance, for traffic maintenance, for lighthouse facilities, and whatnot. So my question to you would be: do you think there's a possibility that Iran would impose any kind of fee or fare over the passing ships, something the US has vehemently opposed?
Iran has obviously weaponized the Hormuz. It's not to Iran. It's not an international waterway. I mean, it's to a certain extent. Of course, Oman has territorial water there as well. It's not a dominion, as you say, but a condominium, perhaps, between Iran and Oman. There has been talk of authority with Iran and Oman. Of course, the United States and Israel would not recognize that, but which was going to lay fees on
this body of water
for the ships, passing ships. The fees were again. It was decided that it would be called. It was thought that it would be called by some other names rather than fees. So it'll have another name, but it'll be imposed by Iran and Oman.
Yes.
At this point, I would assume they're not collecting money. That's not the issue. What Iran wants is, and that is what was breached, some kind of a coordination with Iran before the passage is undertaken. The fine conflict is there is this strip of water very close to the Omanian side of the strait. Iran fears that the non-friendly states would take advantage of that and use it as a thoroughfare. Iran would not allow that. Iran is extremely keen to keep control of this strait because that is their principal weapon. That is their principal weapon in lieu of the nuclear deterrence. So sometimes you might wonder that which is the more useful one for them option for them. But my suspicion is that to the extent possible, they will continue to maintain and control over over Hormuz because they know that the ultimate agreement. In the ultimate agreement, if they want to negotiate from a position of strength, they have to demonstrate beyond shadow of doubt that they control the strait.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, do you think, as part of this conversation, we have talked about Pakistan and referred to Qatar as mediators from this specific region, of course, not referring to the Gulf itself, but Pakistan is part of South Asia, but as part of the Muslim identity that these countries did play a part. But referring to the Gulf region, do you think other countries such as there's Saudi Arabia, which relied on diplomacy to end this conflict, there's Oman, of course, there's Bahrain, there's Kuwait. Do you think these parties who have faced casualties because of this conflict that they were not initially a part of, do you think they are playing a part in the mediation process to end this conflict?
Okay, these countries, as you say, would be the GCC countries,
yes.
Gulf
Cooperation Council countries.
Now, here, Pakistan, remember, has its own security agreement with
Saudi
Arabia, and is a possible potential security provider to the region. The agreement that is reached, if any is, will probably give Pakistan some kind of a role in the security arena.
Of course.
The Gulf states, as you know, were created after what was called the East of Suez withdrawal by Britain in the late 68. East of Suez is a term which is taken from Rudyard Kipling's poem Mandalay.
Okay.
So it meant that, what the British did was withdraw from East of Suez, and as a result, before creating a number of states in the region, and these are the Gulf states. Now, these are today technically nation states, but originally they are part of the similar system, same language, same culture, same social behavior, ruled by distinct families, Al-Thanis in Qatar, Khalifas in Bahrain, then Sabahs in Kuwait,
of course,
Saud, of course, in Saud, so on and so forth,
of course,
and Saids in Oman. So they are separate, independent, near Westphalian states now, but also connected by other values, the common values of values of the Gulf. So they have linked themselves to the Western system, because when the British withdrew, the Americans took over and sort of brought in their sort of these bases. And America today has about 16 bases in the Gulf region, because it is very critical. Initially, it was critical to the British because it lay between India, which was the jewel of the British imperial crown, and Great Britain. But now the importance of the Middle East as a political nerve center of global energy, it's important for the Americans as well, a great power. So that is how the states have come into being. They will continue to play a critical role, but they have their own differences among themselves, because as I explained, these are tribal sheikdoms in many ways, and the sheikhs have their own differences. They always have had historically.
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, if I were to ask you about the recent NATO conference held at Ankara, what do you think transpired? Because there were mentions of Iran. That is where we heard President Donald Trump quite overtly state that the memorandum of understanding with Iran was over, and he considered the Iranian people not being responsive or cooperative enough. Other than that, what do you think transpired? Because it was held in one of the most key countries associated with the region.
Yes, of course. It seemed that in Ankara, President Trump gave the impression of being a Gulliver held back by the Lilliputians, tied down by the Lilliputians, as in the famous Jonathan Swift allegory.
Of course.
And in fact, that is exactly what seemed to have happened. Iran was not on the top of the agenda. This was an important NATO conference. The problem with NATO's problem with the Iran conflict, or whatever President Trump calls it, was the fact that America went into a kinetic battle situation by invading a country without consultation with NATO. NATO's position, the position of the other 30 NATO countries, is that Article 5 of NATO, that joint defense, doesn't applies only when NATO is playing a defensive role, and NATO never invades. So this had nothing to do with NATO itself. But even then, there was no consultation prior to this engagement, and as a result, NATO was taken off guard. Some NATO countries like Spain, Italy, etc., would not even allow their bases to be used by the Americans,
and something that the American president castigated them for. And at the NATO conference, he overtly said that he instructed his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to terminate any economic relations they had with Spain, which goes against the American principles of democratic values and associations, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes. You see, NATO, as Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, said that President Trump has a contribution to NATO in the sense that he managed to get NATO countries to spend more on their defenses.
Yes, of course.
That is true.
Something they are on the same page about.
They are on the same page about, and they are aiming at 5% of the GDP by 2035, which is difficult, by the way, because many NATO countries are not in a position to spend 5%, frankly, of their resources for defense, because that's not what they need.
Yes.
A country like Estonia, for instance, I mean, its specialty lies in something else. It's a cybernetics, etc. So why would Estonia spend on armaments, etc.? So there are problems in thrusts, etc. But the fact is, I think they will review it in 2030 once more and finally aim aim at the final budgetary proportion. As of now, even the United States itself does not spend more than 3.4 or something percent of the budget. If I can,
I think it's 3.4%. Sir,
if I'm right, yes, yeah. Of course, remember that even if America didn't spend it in the NATO within the NATO construct, America would probably have to spend similar amounts for its defense anyway. Anyway. And there are also other problems about Denmark, etc., and Greenland, which he brought to the table, which came like a bolt from the blue in many ways. The interesting thing was he went into NATO saying that he had come for the conference out of his sheer friendship with Turkey, with the president of Turkey,
of course,
and that also he allowed Turkey certain advantages. Turkey had procured that S-400 from Russia,
of course,
and therefore would not have been entitled to procure the F-35 stealth aircraft, which Erdogan went for, of course. And in fact, I think a number of 5 or something was mentioned.
Yes.
I'm not absolutely certain, but the problem is that the theoretical obstruction to Turkish procurement of F-35 and also certain engines for production of Turkey's own. Turkey's own,
of course,
they're stealth aircraft.
They're being quite vehement about their indigenous defense production.
Yeah, yes, indigenous production. And Erdogan and Trump had gotten along very well. I mean, they do get along very well. It was obvious. He went to the airport to receive him, and the body language, everything showed a very close relationship. But remember, it's about 31 independent sovereign heads of
states,
governments who constitute NATO, and others would have felt a little marginalized. But the fact is, of course, President Erdogan was the host. Turkey, by the way, is the number 2 military in terms of numbers and wherewithal, the number 2 NATO country. So in some ways, it was 1 and 2 getting together. But there are certain fissures in NATO that need to be addressed. The original purposes of NATO probably would not have existed if Ukraine wouldn't have happened.
Of course.
You see, they used to talk of NATO as no action, talk only. at one point in time.
Okay.
But after the decline of the Soviet Union, NATO had very little reason to exist.
Of course.
But then when Ukraine happened, and NATO was pushing closer and closer to the Russian Federation, and then you see the problem was Russia appeared to follow the same kind of foreign policy as the Soviet Union, as its avatar in the Soviet Union had done earlier.
Something envisioned by Vladimir Putin himself. He wanted to revive the ideals and prestige of that era.
Yes, to a certain extent.
Yes.
There are many factors that drove that, but President Putin certainly didn't want NATO on his doorstep.
Of course.
Doorstep. Ukraine was a very important component of it was not, by the way, even during the Cold War era, Ukraine by itself was an independent member of the United Nations. It was always strong and certainly, apart from its wheat and all that we hear of it an arms building. It had certain advantages. So these are, and there are many problems that NATO today faces apart from funding, the differences that we have spoken about, and the threats from the Russian Federation. Ukraine is just as important to the European Union, but America in many ways is also perhaps the America First policy places it at the crossroads in some ways. Does America want to go back to Fortress America, from where it will pursue a foreign policy of transactional foreign policy, where every international interaction will be something that would have to benefit America directly, either financially or economically, or in terms of security. In the past, America has taken part in global initiatives which have not been able to follow through, and the American political system works like that. Remember the League of the Nations, which was created as an American effort, but America itself was not able to be, or did not become a member of the League of Nations, which ultimately might have also led to the Second World War. So NATO will, everybody keeps saying that, okay, it's deeply committed to NATO, but we know of these differences. We also have heard that the next summit that was to have taken place next year in Albania may not take place because they probably cannot afford more fissures of this kind. But Article 5 is an important idea that holds NATO together, and it enables NATO to spend more on welfare and other state activities. So you see, it's a kind of balance that they have to do now. If they have to pay 5% GDP as members of NATO for military purposes only, it has to balance other costs and expenditures. But it has to date survived. It probably will. Turkey, of course, NATO is important in the sense that it gives Turkey a European foothold. At the same time, it enhances its extra-European role, as we see in the Middle East as well.
Of course, this is something I wanted you to reflect on. Given Turkey's undeniable presence as part of NATO, and of course within this region that we are speaking of, do you think that there will be further associations between Turkey and of course these Gulf Cooperation Council countries in terms of defense collaborations? Because the defense umbrella, once asserted and quite being asserted right now as well by the United States for the Gulf countries, especially countries such as Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait, it has not translated to being executed the way it was purported to be. For instance, the US would always say that in cases of emergencies, in cases of conflicts, they would protect these Gulf countries from any skirmishes, especially countries such as Saudi Arabia, against attacks from adversaries such as Iran. However, we have not seen a quite accurate translation or accurate interpretation or accurate manifestation of those words into action or in reality. So if I were to make myself sound simpler, do you think that the security apparatus in the Gulf changing, and do you see that powers such as Turkey, which has immense military capabilities due to their indigenous production, do you see them taking a more proactive, or rather like taking up a more proactive role in the Gulf region and providing them with security?
Well, again, going back into the past, of course. Today's Turkey and earlier Ottoman Empire has been very involved with this region. In fact, the present historical trends in many ways began with what is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916. The idea was for France and Britain to carve out the Levant from the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
So we are witnessing a return of the Ottomans in some ways, Ottoman culture, political culture to these parts again. In the burgeoning relationships between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Qatar. You see, so these four countries representing each corner of this region probably will have a role to play in an evolving security structure in that region, in which Turkey will most certainly play a very important role. It has the military capability, it has the financial capability, and it has the political clout.
Of course, sir. And of course, we are looking forward to witnessing their intent to participate, of course. And speaking of their intent, Pakistan has recently had a military cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia, something Turkey has quite assertively shown its interest in taking a part in. So do you see a tripartite situation in the Gulf region between these three countries, which might expand itself to the whole of the Gulf region and
which three countries?
Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. And because both Pakistan and Turkey have quite vehement and, of course, I would say quite impressive military arsenals and capabilities, with quite profoundly trained military people, military men. Would you say that this military association would, in a way, evolve the security dynamics in the Gulf region and bring together the parties involved and, if possible, something along the lines of NATO or something, if not NATO, any other military association?
Okay, if there is a true withdrawal of America from global this thing back into Fortress America.
Of course.
If there is a full implementation of the America First principles in foreign policy, full implementation of the idea that it's not the function of America to go abroad and and kill foreign monsters or whatever the fathers of the American Federation had conceived, it is possible that a new kind of structure will evolve. If the Americans do not need those bases, then there is no reason for the conflict with Iran. You see, I remember we haven't addressed the Israel issue.
Of course.
Which again brings us always back to Palestine, which is the core issue of the conflict. But the security structure Israel, what might evolve is a close Pakistan-Saudi Arabia collaboration.
Of course.
Already Saudis appear to be somewhat chary of giving a full play to the Americans, as we have heard that early last month when the Operation Freedom was to have been implemented in the Gulf of Hormuz. The Saudis at the last moment would not allow their bases to be used by America, which is why the very next day it had to be called off, and it led to the MBS and Trump this day
facing a rift.
Yes, a face-off in some ways. So that are signs of the evolving order. Pakistan has this close collaboration. Pakistan is a possible security provider for whatever security the Sauds of Saudi Arabia will require. You see, that to that extent Pakistan can provide, perhaps. If Qatar does not have an American base, for instance, Qatar has functioned sometimes very closely with Iran, and even to a certain extent it has had contacts with Israel. If the central issue of Palestine is resolved, you see, then you can really foresee the next sort of geopolitical map. That will be another paradigm shift. If at some point in time there is a resolution of the Palestinian conflict, and which could only lie in probably in the evolution of two Palestinian states, two states. If that were to happen, peace would return to Gaza, then the main source of all these conflicts would, for the time being, disappear. Other conflicts will come, of course. I mean, there is never a world without issues.
Of course.
So other issues will evolve. But the current issues that for the last few decades we have been confronting in the region will diminish. We are a long way from it, but then the next few years will be very significant. There will be probably, if there are changes in the American administration, if there are changes in Israel administration, if there is a understanding with Iran. Mind you, one of the points that Iranians argue is that you remove the foreign bases from these countries and the differences diminish.
Of course.
Because...
and this was one of the core demands as part of the peace process.
Yes. And you see that there is even if there is a Shia-Sunni divide, over and above, there is an Islamic garb that sort of envelopes these countries. But even if that you remove that, and if these truly emerge as Westphalian, post-Westphalian countries, then we can look to a more peaceable, more stable Middle East. At the same time, I must enter a caveat here. The Westphalian state system is not perfect in the Middle East because in certain ways, certain pre-Westphalian values, like importance of religion and all that sort of thing, do play a role in these state formations and state politics.
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. While referring to these American military bases in the Gulf region, this is something I wanted to reflect on my previous question, that the Americans, while establishing these bases, they did promise longevity in their security providing to these Gulf countries. However, as I've said before, the reality has not been represented in a way in which they did provide perfect security to these countries. Where do you see US's association, security association with the Gulf countries going, especially countries such as Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, or Kuwait? Where do you think it's going, and are we on the verge of an evolution where we will see the Gulf's disinterest, in a sense, of continuing with the security apparatus that they have going on with the US, and almost having a stronger preference of their security associations with countries such as Pakistan and Turkey? Do you see that change happening where the preference for their security partner and security provision would shift from the US to these two countries such as Turkey and Pakistan?
Yes, you would, but against whom? Security against whom?
Of course.
You see, if the Palestine problem is, we have seen sometimes when in fact there was a period of time we tend to forget that after the Norwegians had done those Palestinian agreements and all that sort of thing, and there was a slow movement towards a rapprochement in Palestine. The Abrahamic Accords had taken place. The relations between the UAE and Israel had certainly commenced, as had between Israel and Qatar. So those had begun. You can have a stable system in a region which actually prides historically in this intercommunal relations. We've all heard of stories how during the Crusades, when Richard the Lionheart fell ill, Saladin sent fruits and ice and a doctor. To look after him. The two had never met actually, but it is said historically that there was an understanding between these two sides. Even if that were not the case, very idea that historians talked of an understanding between Saladin and Richard meant that the concept was there that the the warring leaders can have a commonality of certain visions. Those days it was a narrower vision of chivalry, but it could be expanded to political ideas. In some ways, we have also seen a generation of an interesting relationship, say, between Presidents Putin and Trump, and Trump and President Xi Jinping as well. These are the three great powers three of the great powers of contemporary world, and the leaders left on their own have got along quite well.
Quite well, of course. Thank you so much, sir. Now let me ask you about the role of Israel, something we have not explicitly mentioned. The role of Israel. Of course. Something we have not explicitly touched upon up until now. However, there were comments made from President Trump saying that the peace process was being stalled by Israel. This is not my word. This is something he exclaimed during a press briefing, if I'm correct. And there were instances where President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, is the Israeli Prime Minister, they had disagreements about the process through which peace in the Middle East would be secured and sustained. So where do you see Israel, or rather, like, now that we have seen the memorandum being in tatters, where do you see Israel going along with this conflict in Iran? Do you think that they will be more proactive both in Lebanon as well as their stance against Iran?
You see, you talked of differences between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, etc. We're not certain if they're tactical or they're strategic, because it's not Israel, but there is a very strong pro-Israeli or Zionist lobby, which has a tremendous influence in American politics. You see, so it's across the aisle. On both sides, of course. So that is a part of the problem, that it's an American domestic problem. So they'll have to resolve that. To what extent they can be free of these influences of the pro-Israeli lobby. Again, we do not know what kind of thinking will emerge in Israel in a pro-Netanyahu situation. It is quite possible. We have seen a relationship like that develop between Egypt and Israel at one point in time. So it is possible. I would like to think the glass in this respect is half full. And there is, if there is some kind of an understanding with regard to the fate of the Palestinian people in a way that their future is taken care of, it is possible. The world has the financial resources, etc., to sort of profit, to help that process and profit in terms of stability. A little point about the bases that we were talking about earlier. We didn't complete that discussion. You see, the role of the base is important. What role the base actually plays. For instance, the Chinese have a base in Djibouti. Of course. Djibouti, but you don't hear of a conflict this thing, because the received wisdom is that, there is no imperialist role. So you cannot generalize the roles of bases. Earlier on in Australia, there was this base. There is still the Pine Gap, you see, which was a communications base. So during the liberal governments in the 1970s argued that the Pine Gap plays actually a positive role in the Cold War, because the communications are given to submarines, and submarine is a second strike weapon. A submarine does not initiate a nuclear conflict. Submarine is second strike. So anything that facilitates a second strike capability is stabilizing, theoretically, in a nuclear war.
Of course.
That was the idea, which sort of was sold by the then government in Australia to those who had opposed the Pine Gap base. So it's the role that the base plays. But eventually, given the nature of contemporary war fighting, the need for bases will also disappear. It is not for nothing that China does not have bases, that does not have 850 bases like the United States, because they would not need them today. Today, you probably will not fight wars to occupy territories, largely to occupy territories, but to inflict some kind of a limited damage to the adversary in order to obtain some benefits from it. The nature of war fighting is also changing.
Of course.
We have seen the whole war. I mean, we haven't discussed this at all, how Iran and United States have fought. Iran has had to use its asymmetry to its advantage,
of course.
You see, and how they had to reshape the war fighting mechanisms and operational theories in order to fit it to the requirements. I mean, they did not need a navy, they did not need an air force. They needed rocketry, and they needed decision making. They needed precision.
Of course, infusing science with budget. Infusing science with budget.
Science with budget and precision thinking.
Precision thinking, of course, sir. Sir, this brings me to one of my final questions, which is what, as you were saying about Fortress America, do you see a future, given that Donald Trump has this mentality of resorting to Fortress America and resorting to a mindset where if we do not gain something from an association, we are just not there? Do you think that these bases, which have been decimated, if I were to use that word, by Iranian rockets and missiles, do you think that there will be a continuation of said bases, or would you say that there is even a slightest possibility that the US would be done with their military presence in the Gulf and in the greater Middle East? Do you see that future, or do you think the status quo remains as it is?
We had seen during the Obama era what they called a pivot to the east.
Yes, we did.
Okay,
as an anti-piracy.
Already there was some thinking at some point in time that the pivot should shift more eastwards. Because the competitor, if not the adversary, the competitor will be China, and therein would lie almost in Marxian terms we would say the major contradiction,
of course,
in global politics, China and America. In which case, the importance of Middle East would diminish, or West Asia, whatever you call that region, would diminish. So a reduction of tensions in Israel and Palestine would lead to if it leads to a more stable or peaceful Middle East, that is likely to happen. America is likely to, if it is reducing its footprint on NATO. You see, imagine what will happen in the Middle East. I mean,
of course.
See, so will concentrate on their competition elsewhere. I'm not saying on their conflict, but if the ultimate competition or collaboration is between America and China, and if the next few decades of global politics will be determined and shaped by a relationship between the two principal protagonists. And it is possible to have a stable world without conflict. But that's what politics and diplomacy is about. And as we started our discussions, we said that one of the key role of states is to discuss when there are differences between them, what is through diplomacy, and negotiate and conclude those differences, end those differences.
Thank you so much, sir. This is my final question to you. It might sound binary in nature, but I want you to keep an open mind. So given that both the countries are at a standstill and they're not proceeding with the peace process where they should be focusing on a peace agreement, given that the memorandum of understanding itself is at a precarious position, do you see a future where, of course, the negotiations are in place and we are going to be witnessing a stable, prosperous, and of course a fixed peace agreement between the United States and Iran? Do you see that possibility?
Well, as far as I'm aware, the efforts of the mediators are relentless. As the funeral was progressing, in fact, preparations were afoot, perhaps in Islamabad, for a possible meeting of the parties.
At the funeral?
As the funeral was proceeding, and people
course.
were talking of, in fact, discussions in the funeral because the Field Marshal Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif were in Iran. So if this flare-up had not happened, there was a distinct possibility that there could have been and would have been a meeting in Islamabad on the 11th of this month. You see, so it had progressed to that level. As yet, mind you, the protagonists have not talked to each other face to face.
Yes, indirect talks are going on.
That will be the next stage. So the next stage would have happened on the 11th. But perhaps we'll have to give it one more effort. But I do hope that the endeavors remain relentless, as I have said, and at the end of the day, I think these efforts will bear fruits
and make good sense prevail.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It is a privilege having you over at the platform, and I hope that you will come back and enlighten us each month.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. I found this discussion extremely stimulating for myself as well.
Thank you so much. It is our pleasure, sir. So viewers, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, given the topic that we have taken on and the comprehensive discussion we have had. So if you like our episodes, of course, go to our Facebook page as well as YouTube page and like and subscribe respectively, and comment on our videos as to which episodes you expect from us, which topics you want us to discuss and elaborate on, and of course bring you comprehensive and meaningful content. Thank you so much. Share our videos and stay with us.